Good afternoon. My name is Niall Feldman and I am the Director of New Products at Solid State Logic in the UK. I have worked for SSL since 1988, so 30-something years, and I started at SSL as a service engineer installing the first or the 4000 series SSL analog consoles. In fact, one of my first commissioning jobs was to install a console at Peter Gabriel's Real World Studios. So after spending some time installing and being a technical installation person, SSL had started to make digital products, and as my career evolved, I became the person who looked after some of our digital products, including the earliest of our digital mixing consoles. In fact, one strong memory I have of being in Japan was in about 1995, when a very well-known SSL person, Chris Jenkins, CJ, and I came to launch two mixing consoles. So CJ was here for the 9000 J series console, and I was here for our Axiom digital console. And it's quite interesting to reflect that I'm here in Japan 30 years later to introduce a console that is a mix of the two technologies. So an analog mixing console that has digital control capabilities, and that gives us really powerful benefits in terms of reset and recall of the console. Do you want me to talk a little bit about the console? So the console I am sat in front of here is our Oracle mixing console, and it is the latest analog console from Solid State Logic. One of the things that makes Oracle interesting is that it looks like an analog mixing console on the control surface. So I have channel strips, I have transport controls, I have control VCAs, so typical things that you would see from an SSL analog mixing console, but it is completely digitally controlled, and that basically means I can reset or recall the console at the press of a button. So I can change the configuration and setting of the control surface instantly, and equally, if I change the workstation session, I can change the console configuration, and this makes it a new way for analog studios to work with sessions, because previously with traditional analog consoles you have to recall settings or reset settings. With Oracle, I can now switch between mixing sessions or tracking sessions at the press of a button, effectively. So, yeah, some other nice, interesting features about SSL's Oracle console are that it has a good mix of digital control and analog functionality. So the channel strip looks like a channel strip, as I said. It has an input gain control, filter control, auxiliary sends, and 4-band equalizer section, a large fader, and a pan control. But like the very traditional SSL consoles, it is also an inline console as well as being a digitally controlled console. So this is my large fader control, and by pressing a button here I can access my small fader. Aside from looking at the surface and the screens, I can also switch the screen to display the detail of the channel strip. So basically, by pressing an ARM button here, I can call up the detail view of the channel like this. So now I can see all of the functions in the channel strip. So here I have my large fader pan, here I have equalizer controls, and if I switch to small fader, now I have my small fader control here on the control surface. So it's easy to use and is very familiar to people who are experienced with analog inline mixing consoles. Another nice thing about this display is that it shows me my path routing as well. So an inline console has typically a channel path, or as SSL call it sometimes, a large fader path and a small fader path. And this picture here shows me my routing for the large fader path and for the small fader path. And I can move my processing between either path at the press of a button. Something else that is quite nice about the control surface in the console is that here I've got traditional peak meter bar graph type displays, and on a bay by bay basis I can switch to showing a VU meter type display. So this is a different response, it's an RMS response, not a peak response, and it looks like a sort of familiar VU meter, but because we are using graphics to show this, it's easy to switch between the channels. Something else that you might notice in this display is that I have a mix of mono and stereo channels in the control surface. So my channels here, numbers 1 and 2 are mono channels, and channels here 7, 8, 9 and 10 are stereo channels. And I can freely combine or disconnect mono and stereo channels in the control surface. So for sessions where I have, for example, here we have overhead mics and a piano mic, those are stereo sources, but I can have them on one fader in the control surface. So even though we have 16 channel faders in front of us, I have in this session, I've actually got control of 20 channels in this project that I'm listening to. So that's a little bit about the channel section. In the center section of the console, this display shows me all of the buses that are in the console. So all of the time I can see the buses for the console, and I can see levels that are going out to the console. So here, for example, I can see my main stereo buses. So there are 4 main stereo buses. There are 10 auxiliary buses, and you can freely configure those to be mono or stereo. So in this example, I have 2 stereo buses, aux 1 and 2, aux 3 and 4, and then my other 6 buses are mono, aux 5 to 10. And I can also see my 16 track buses. So in terms of buses, the console has got 4 main stereo buses, it has 10 auxiliary buses, and it has 16 track buses. And that is in addition to the channels, which have their independent insert points in both paths and independent direct outputs in both paths as well. Some other nice little features of the center section. Here is my main bus level control. So if I bring main bus up here, I can control the main bus level here. I have my transport controls and jog wheel and shuttle wheel, as you might expect. And I then have control of things like monitoring. So this is my monitor level, and here I've got the bus compression. So a classic feature of SSL mix buses is that there is a bus compressor that is helping produce the sound of the mix, helping bring the mix together. A couple of years ago, SSL introduced a sophisticated bus compressor called Bus Plus, and as you might expect with a new SSL analog console, we have the same sophisticated bus compressor that is part of the control surface. So just like in the channel strip where I can bring up detailed view of the channels, I can do something similar in the center sections as well. So here are my surface bus controls, but by pressing my detail view here, I can bring the complete Bus Plus processing to the surface. And the controls map directly to the image that I see on the screen. So with hands on the surface, I can adjust my threshold, makeup gain, attack release, ratio and mix. And these are in the same layout as SSL bus compressors for many years. And similarly, I also, in Bus Plus, we have a dynamic equalizer, and also I have a dynamic equalizer here, and I've got adjustable controls for the threshold and the gain directly from the surface. But an interesting feature of both of these detail views is that these orange, large orange knobs become navigation encoders for these settings. So for example, in the dynamic EQ, if I want to change the frequency or the ratio settings and the range settings, I can basically adjust those from the control surface here. So here I'm changing the attack time for the high frequency section of the dynamic EQ. So this is a really sophisticated amount of processing, but another huge benefit of the system is because the system can instantly remember and recall these settings. You can create some really sophisticated mixes, but you do not have to remember how you created those mixes. The system will remember that structure for you and allow you to reset things. This is really interesting in an analog console, because an analog console and the nature of analog signal processing is that it does not introduce any of the challenges that digital brings, especially when you're making mixes and submixes. So in this console it's really easy because we have a lot of buses, we can make stem mixes for the drums, for example, and for the bass independently. We can use analog signal processing to process those signals as part of the console, and then we can combine those signals back together, and we do not have any issues of phase or latency or to deal with at all. I think that's a huge benefit of analog processing. And then the digital control benefit is that all of that structure, so you can make some really sophisticated mixes, and all of that structure can be remembered and recalled by the system. We have additional controls for things like VCAs here, so I can switch to control VCA faders and control multiple levels in the control surface. So if I switch the faders here, so here for example I can control the VCA control of the surface faders. So from the console I can control and switch things like VCA levels. So here for example I'm controlling multiple faders from my VCA control groups. And this allows me to structure either faders that I have on the surface or faders that are on different layers to be easily controlled from the faders in the control surface. So I can mix whether I'm controlling things from the VCAs and or the faders simultaneously. So another feature of the console is the standard configuration has 24 inline channels, and this can be expanded with an additional 24 inline channels. So this surface can mix 48 inline channels, and if you are mixing something you can use both paths in the channel to create the mix, and that means that you have 96 signals to mix from a workstation, and each of those signals has an insert point, it has a pan control, it has a fader control, and you can also have a direct output from each of those paths as well. So if you have made quite a sophisticated mix, you can print that back to the workstation from every part of the mixing console. So yeah, I think that's a brief overview of the capabilities of the console. But hopefully if you get a chance to sit down and have a demo of the console, you will explore and find many more sophisticated parts of the system to explore. So thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you very much for taking the time with the console and us here at LUSH while we were in Japan. And thank you, and look forward to seeing you in front of an Oracle console soon.